Welcome to Woo English. In this captivating story, you'll learn English through clear and simple sentences. We encourage you to share your thoughts and leave comments as you follow the journey of one of history's greatest thinkers, Aristotle. If you enjoy the story, please press the like button. It really helps support us. This story is designed for educational purposes. Our goal is to help you improve your English while being inspired by Aristotle's life, a life full of exploration, wisdom, and the pursuit of knowledge. His journey offers valuable lessons about curiosity, learning, and the quest for truth. But we do not encourage or glorify any actions in the story. Let's begin this timeless journey together. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Thinker. In the quiet coastal town of Stagira, nestled in the hills of ancient Greece, the air was warm with the golden glow of the setting sun. It was a day like any other in the small town, with fishermen mending their nets by the sea, children playing in the dusty streets, and women fetching water from the well. But for one family, this day would be remembered forever. In a modest home, a cry of a newborn baby pierced the evening air, signalling the arrival of a child who would one day change the world. This child was Aristotle. Aristotle's mother, Thyestes, held her baby close, feeling his warmth against her skin. She gazed down at him with a mixture of love and wonder, as if sensing the extraordinary path that lay before him. Beside her stood Nicomachus, Aristotle's father, a man of great knowledge and wisdom. Nicomachus was no ordinary father. He was the personal physician to King Amyntas III of Macedonia, a man trusted with the health and well-being of the most powerful people in the land. Nicomachus looked at his son with pride, already imagining the bright future that awaited him. He knew that Aristotle, even as a tiny infant, was destined for something remarkable. Nicomachus had seen many things in his life, treating the ailments of kings and nobles, studying the human body with a passion that went beyond mere duty. He understood that life was full of mysteries, and he longed to share this knowledge with his son. The house where Aristotle was born was simple, yet it was filled with the scent of herbs and medicines. Scrolls and books were stacked high on shelves, their pages filled with the wisdom of the ancients. As a child, Aristotle would crawl on the floor of this house, reaching for these scrolls, fascinated by the strange symbols and drawings that filled their pages. From the earliest days, he was surrounded by learning, by the whispers of knowledge passed down through generations. As Aristotle grew, so did his curiosity. He was not like other children in Stagira, who spent their days playing games or helping their parents with chores. Aristotle was different. He would sit by the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, his mind filled with questions. Why did the sun rise in the east and set in the west? What made the stars twinkle in the night sky? How did the fish breathe underwater? These were not the questions of a typical child, but Aristotle was no typical child. The people of Stagira began to notice the boy's strange habits. While other children laughed and played, Aristotle would often wander off on his own, lost in thought. Some whispered that he was odd, that he spent too much time thinking and not enough time living. But others, especially those who knew his father, saw something special in him. They believed that Aristotle's curiosity was a sign of great things to come. Nicomachus encouraged his son's thirst for knowledge. He would take young Aristotle on walks through the countryside, pointing out different plants and explaining their uses in medicine. He taught Aristotle to observe the world carefully, to notice the details that others might overlook. Together they would gather herbs, and Nicomachus would show Aristotle how to grind them into powders and mix them into potions. It was during these moments that Aristotle's love for learning began to blossom. But life in Stagira was not always easy. The town, though beautiful, was small and isolated. The people lived simple lives, far removed from the bustling cities of Athens or Sparta. Aristotle, even as a child, felt the limitations of his environment. He longed to see more of the world, to experience the wonders he had only read about in his father's books. He dreamed of traveling to distant lands, of meeting great thinkers and learning from them. One day, as Aristotle and his father walked along the beach, Nicomachus told his son stories of the great philosophers who lived in Athens. He spoke of Socrates, the man who asked questions that no one else dared to ask, and of Plato, the student who built upon his teacher's ideas to create a new way of thinking. Aristotle listened with wide eyes, captivated by the tales of these men who sought to understand the world not through myths and legends, but through reason and observation. "Father," Aristotle asked one evening as they sat by the fire, "will I ever meet these men? Will I ever go to Athens?" Nicomachus smiled at his son's eagerness. "One day, my son, you will. But for now, you must learn all you can here in Stagira. The world is vast and there is much to discover. But first, you must prepare yourself." And so Aristotle continued to learn, his mind expanding with each passing day. He spent hours in his father's study, reading the scrolls and trying to understand the complex ideas they contained. He asked questions, endless questions, that sometimes even Nicomachus struggled to answer. But instead of being frustrated, Aristotle saw each unanswered question as a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. The seasons changed, and Aristotle grew older. The small town of Stagira began to feel even smaller to him, like a cage that he was desperate to escape. He knew that his future lay beyond the hills that surrounded his home, in the great cities where knowledge flowed like a river. But he also knew that his time had not yet come. He had to be patient, to wait until he was ready. As the years passed, Aristotle's reputation as a thinker began to spread. People from neighbouring towns would come to Stagira to see the boy who asked such strange and difficult questions. They marvelled at his intelligence, at the way he seemed to see the world differently from everyone else. Some were intimidated by his sharp mind, while others were inspired by it. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. Nicomachus fell ill, his once strong body weakened by a sickness that no herb or potion could cure. Aristotle watched helplessly as his father, the man who had taught him so much, grew weaker by the day. It was a harsh lesson for Aristotle, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He realized that even the greatest minds could not control everything, that there were limits to human knowledge and power. When Nicomachus passed away, Aristotle was left with a deep sense of loss. But rather than letting it consume him, he channeled his grief into his studies. He became more determined than ever to learn, to understand the world in a way that his father never could. He knew that he had to leave Stagira, to seek out the knowledge that lay beyond his hometown. And so, at the age of 17, Aristotle made the decision that would shape the rest of his life. He packed his belongings, said goodbye to his mother, and the town he had known all his life, and set off on the road to Athens. The journey was long and uncertain, but Aristotle walked with purpose, his heart filled with the hope and determination of youth. As he left Stagira behind, Aristotle did not look back. He knew that his future lay ahead of him, in the city of philosophers, where he would finally find the answers to the questions that had haunted him since childhood. The boy from Stagira was now on a path to greatness, a path that would lead him to become one of the most influential thinkers the world had ever known. Chapter 2: The Journey to Athens. Aristotle was just 17 when his life took a turn that would change everything. His father, Nicomachus, had always been a guiding light for him, a man of great knowledge and wisdom. But one day, that light dimmed. Nicomachus fell gravely ill, and despite all his knowledge of medicine, nothing could save him. Aristotle watched helplessly as his father, the man who had taught him so much, slipped away. The loss was a heavy burden, one that young Aristotle could not fully understand. It felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet, leaving him lost and uncertain. But Aristotle was not one to give in to despair. His father had always encouraged him to seek knowledge, to ask questions and find answers. Now, more than ever, Aristotle felt the need to continue on that path. He knew that his father would want him to keep learning, to keep pushing forward, even in the face of such sorrow. So, with a heart full of both grief and determination, Aristotle made a decision that would set the course for the rest of his life. He would go to Athens. Athens was known throughout Greece as the centre of knowledge, the birthplace of philosophy. It was a city where great minds gathered to discuss ideas, to challenge each other, and to seek the truth. For Aristotle, Athens represented hope. A place where he could learn and grow, where he could find the answers to the questions that had always filled his mind. With little more than a few belongings and the memory of his father, Aristotle set off on the long journey to Athens. The road ahead was not easy. It was a path filled with uncertainty, stretching across miles of rugged terrain. The sun was hot, beating down on him as he walked, and the nights were cold and lonely. But Aristotle was determined. Each step he took was a step closer to his future, a future that he could not yet see but knew was waiting for him. The days turned into weeks as Aristotle made his way along the ancient roads. He passed through small villages and vast open fields, always moving forward, always keeping Athens in his sights. His sandals kicked up dust as he walked, and his skin grew tanned and tough from the relentless sun. But despite the hardships, there was something about the journey that filled him with a quiet sense of purpose. The world around him, with its changing landscapes and endless skies, seemed to mirror the changes happening within him. At night, when the world was still, Aristotle would sit by the side of the road and gaze up at the stars. He would think of his father, of the lessons he had learned, and of the life that lay ahead. The stars, twinkling in the vast darkness, seemed to whisper secrets to him, secrets that he longed to understand. Aristotle knew that the journey was more than just a physical one. It was a journey of the mind and the spirit, a journey that was shaping him into the man he was meant to become. Finally, after many days of travel, Aristotle reached the outskirts of Athens. The city, with its towering buildings and bustling streets, lay before him like a vision. It was more magnificent than he had ever imagined. The Acropolis stood high on a hill, its temples and statues glowing in the afternoon light. The sound of voices, of people talking and laughing, filled the air, mingling with the scents of food and flowers. Aristotle felt a thrill in his heart. He had arrived. As he entered the city, Aristotle was filled with a sense of awe. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of wisdom and learning. Scholars gathered in the agora, the public marketplace, where they discussed philosophy and debated ideas. Students hurried to and from the various schools, their arms filled with scrolls and books. The air was thick with the energy of thought, of minds at work, and Aristotle knew that he had come to the right place. One of the first things Aristotle did was to seek out the Academy, the famous school founded by the great philosopher Plato. The Academy was the heart of Athens' intellectual life, a place where the brightest minds gathered to explore the mysteries of the universe. Aristotle had heard of Plato and his teachings, and he knew that if he wanted to learn, if he wanted to truly understand the world, this was where he needed to be. But getting into the Academy was no easy task. It was a place reserved for the best and brightest, for those who showed exceptional promise. Aristotle, still just a young man from a small town, was not sure if he would be accepted. But he had come too far to turn back now. With a mixture of hope and determination, he approached the gates of the Academy. To his surprise and relief, Aristotle was welcomed into the school. Plato, recognizing the potential in the young man, agreed to take him on as a student. For Aristotle, this was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would see him grow from a curious boy into one of the greatest thinkers the world had ever known. Life at the Academy was everything Aristotle had hoped for, and more. He was surrounded by students who shared his passion for learning, students who were just as eager as he was to explore the depths of knowledge. The days were filled with lectures and discussions, with debates that challenged the mind and opened up new ways of thinking. Plato himself was a constant presence, guiding his students with wisdom and insight. But Aristotle was not content to simply absorb the teachings of others. He began to form his own ideas, to question what he was being taught, and to seek answers on his own. He spent hours in the Academy's library, poring over ancient texts, studying everything from mathematics and biology to ethics and politics. His mind was like a sponge, soaking up information, always hungry for more. Aristotle's time in Athens was a period of intense growth and discovery. He learned not just from books and teachers, but from the city itself. He walked through the streets, observing the people, the way they lived, the way they thought. He visited the great temples and marveled at the art and architecture, seeing in them reflections of the human spirit. He listened to the debates in the agora, where citizens discussed the issues of the day, and he began to understand the complexities of politics and society. As the years passed, Aristotle's reputation as a thinker grew. He was no longer just a student. He was becoming a philosopher in his own right. His ideas began to take shape, ideas that would one day challenge even those of his teacher, Plato. But for now, Aristotle remained focused on learning, on absorbing all that Athens had to offer. The journey to Athens had been long and difficult, but it had brought Aristotle to the place where he belonged. In the city of wisdom, he found not just knowledge, but a community of minds that inspired him to reach higher, to think deeper. The boy who had left Stagira with little more than a dream had found his purpose. And though he could not yet see it, his journey was far from over. The road ahead was still full of challenges and discoveries. But Aristotle was ready. He had found his path, and he would follow it wherever it led. Chapter 3. The Student of Plato. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city of Athens, as Aristotle approached the entrance to the Academy. His heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was no ordinary school. It was the Academy, the legendary institution founded by the great philosopher Plato. For years, Aristotle had dreamed of this moment, and now, standing before the gates, he knew his life was about to change forever. The academy was more than just a place of learning. It was the very heart of philosophy in Greece. Within its walls, the brightest minds gathered to explore the mysteries of life, the universe, and everything in between. Aristotle had heard stories of the debates that took place here, of the deep questions asked, and the profound answers sought. Now, he was about to become part of this world, to join the ranks of those who dared to seek the truth. As he stepped inside, Aristotle was struck by the beauty of the place. The academy was surrounded by lush gardens, with olive trees providing shade and flowers blooming in every corner. The air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and the soft murmur of students deep in conversation. Everywhere he looked, there were scholars and thinkers, their faces serious, their minds at work. Aristotle felt a thrill of anticipation. This was where he belonged. Soon, Aristotle was introduced to Plato himself. The older philosopher was a man of great wisdom, his eyes sharp and his presence commanding. Plato welcomed Aristotle with a kind smile, but there was a depth in his gaze that suggested he was always thinking, always questioning. Aristotle immediately felt a deep respect for this man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge. From that day on, Aristotle's life was transformed. The academy became his second home, a place where he could immerse himself in the world of ideas. Each day began with lectures from Plato, where the students would gather to listen to their teacher's words. Plato spoke of the world of forms, of perfect ideas that existed beyond the physical world. He taught that everything we see and touch is just a shadow of these perfect forms, and that true knowledge could only be found by understanding these ideals. Aristotle was captivated by Plato's teachings. He admired the elegance of the ideas, the way they explained so much about the world. But as time went on, he began to feel a growing sense of unease. There were questions that nagged at him, questions that Plato's theories did not fully answer. Aristotle was curious about the world he could see and touch, the world of nature, of living things, of the physical universe. He wondered if the answers to the great questions of life could also be found by studying these tangible things, rather than only by contemplating abstract ideas. Plato encouraged his students to question everything, to never accept ideas without examining them from every angle. This was a lesson that Aristotle took to heart. He began to explore his own thoughts, to develop ideas that sometimes differed from those of his teacher. While Plato focused on the world of forms, Aristotle started to look more closely at the natural world, at the details that others might overlook. In the afternoons, after the lectures were over, Aristotle would often wander through the gardens of the academy, lost in thought. He would observe the plants, the insects, and the animals that lived there, fascinated by the complexity of life. He began to see patterns in nature, to notice how everything seemed to have a purpose, a place in the grand design of the world. These observations led him to believe that knowledge could be found not just in abstract ideas, but in the careful study of the world around us. Aristotle's approach was different from that of his fellow students. While they spent hours debating the nature of forms, Aristotle would be found examining the veins of a leaf, the movement of an ant, or the flight of a bird. He believed that by understanding these small details, one could begin to understand the larger truths of the universe. This was a new way of thinking, one that would eventually lead Aristotle to develop his own philosophy, distinct from that of his teacher. Despite these differences, Aristotle remained deeply respectful of Plato. He continued to attend the lectures, to engage in the discussions, and to learn from his teacher. But he also began to express his own ideas, to share his observations with others. Sometimes these ideas would spark debates, with students arguing passionately about the nature of reality, of knowledge, and of truth. These debates were the lifeblood of the academy, pushing everyone to think harder, to dig deeper. One of the most memorable moments of Aristotle's time at the academy was a debate on the nature of reality. Plato argued that the physical world was merely a shadow of the true reality, which existed in the world of forms. Aristotle, however, proposed a different view. He suggested that the physical world was real, and that it was through our senses that we could begin to understand it. He argued that by observing the natural world, by studying it carefully, we could uncover the principles that governed it. The debate was intense, with students divided between the two views. Plato listened carefully to Aristotle's arguments, his face thoughtful. He did not dismiss his students' ideas, but instead encouraged the discussion. This was the mark of a great teacher, someone who could inspire his students to think for themselves, even if it meant challenging his own teachings. As the years passed, Aristotle's reputation as a thinker grew. He was no longer just a student, he was becoming a philosopher in his own right. His ideas were beginning to take shape, ideas that would eventually form the foundation of much of Western thought. But for now, Aristotle remained focused on learning, on exploring every avenue of knowledge, on questioning everything. The relationship between Aristotle and Plato was complex. There was deep respect, but also a growing recognition that their paths were beginning to diverge. Plato, now an older man, continued to develop his theories, while Aristotle, still young and full of energy, began to explore new ideas. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, on the understanding that true knowledge comes from the free exchange of ideas. Aristotle's time at the academy was coming to an end, but it had shaped him in ways he could not yet fully understand. He had learned not just from Plato, but from the very act of questioning, of exploring, of seeking the truth. The student was becoming the teacher. The follower was becoming the leader. And though Aristotle would one day go on to found his own school and develop his own philosophy, he would always carry with him the lessons he had learned at the academy. As Aristotle prepared to leave the academy, he knew that his journey was far from over. He had found his voice, his own way of thinking, but there was still so much to learn, so much to discover. The world was vast, full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And Aristotle, the young philosopher who had once stood nervously at the gates of the academy, was now ready to step into that world and seek out those answers for himself. Chapter 4. The Break from Plato. The warm sun of Athens shone brightly over the academy, but in the heart of Aristotle there was a shadow growing. As the years passed, the young philosopher had developed his own thoughts, his own beliefs, and his own way of understanding the world. Yet, these new ideas did not always align with those of his teacher, the great Plato. Aristotle found himself questioning more and more of what he had learned, and the bond between the master and the student began to strain under the weight of their differences. Plato had always been a towering figure in Aristotle's life, a man of immense wisdom and authority. His teachings on the world of forms, the idea that the true essence of things existed in a realm beyond our physical world, had shaped much of Aristotle's early thinking. But as Aristotle grew older and more experienced, he found himself drawn to the tangible, the physical, the things he could see and touch. He began to doubt that the world of forms was the ultimate truth. Aristotle's approach to knowledge was becoming distinctly his own. While Plato emphasized the importance of contemplating ideals and abstract concepts, Aristotle was more interested in the here and now, in the real world. He believed that by studying the natural world, one could gain true understanding. The physical world was not just a shadow of something greater, but a reality full of meaning and purpose on its own. This growing divergence in thought did not go unnoticed. The debates between Plato and Aristotle became more intense, filled with passionate arguments that echoed through the halls of the academy. Plato, though always respectful of his student, could see that Aristotle was no longer following his teachings as he once had. The relationship that had once been so harmonious now carried a tension that neither could ignore. One day, after a particularly heated discussion about the nature of reality, Aristotle realized that he could no longer stay at the academy. The decision was not an easy one. Leaving the academy meant leaving behind a part of himself, a place where he had grown and learned so much. It meant parting ways with Plato, who had been more than just a teacher. He had been a mentor, a guide, almost like a father figure. But Aristotle knew that if he was to stay true to his own beliefs, to his own search for truth, he had to step out on his own. The day Aristotle decided to leave was filled with a mix of emotions. The streets of Athens were bustling with life, but for Aristotle, everything seemed quieter, more distant. He walked through the familiar paths of the academy one last time, taking in the sights and sounds that had been a part of his life for so many years. The olive trees in the garden, the voices of students engaged in deep discussion, the smell of parchment and ink in the air, all these things were now bittersweet reminders of what he was leaving behind. When the moment came to tell Plato of his decision, Aristotle's heart was heavy. He approached his teacher with respect, but also with a sense of finality. Plato listened quietly as Aristotle explained his reasons, his desire to explore the world in his own way, to develop his own philosophy. There was no anger in Plato's eyes, only a deep understanding of the journey that his student was about to embark on. It was as if Plato knew that this day would come, that the student would one day outgrow the master. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, Aristotle left Athens. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was a path that he knew he had to take. He walked away from the city that had been his home for so long, his thoughts filled with the ideas that had begun to take shape in his mind. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that there was still much to learn, much to discover. Aristotle's wanderings took him across Greece and beyond. He visited different cities, met new people, and engaged with other philosophers. Everywhere he went, he sought knowledge, always asking questions, always probing deeper into the mysteries of the world. He studied the natural world with a keen eye, observing the behavior of animals, the growth of plants, the movements of the stars. His curiosity was boundless, and he began to develop a philosophy that was rooted in the physical world, in the study of nature. During his travels, Aristotle encountered many different schools of thought. He met philosophers who, like Plato, believed in the power of abstract ideas, and others who, like himself, were more interested in the empirical world. These encounters helped to shape his thinking, to refine his ideas. He debated with other thinkers, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing, but always learning, always growing. One of the most significant stops on Aristotle's journey was in the city of Assos, in Asia Minor. There, he was welcomed by Hermias, a ruler who had once been a student of Plato himself. Hermias recognized the brilliance of Aristotle's mind and offered him a place in his court. Aristotle stayed in Assos for several years, where he continued his studies and began to develop his own school of thought. It was here that he started to lay the foundations for what would become some of his most influential work. During this time, Aristotle also began to teach. He gathered a small group of students who were eager to learn from him, to explore the world through his eyes. His teachings were different from those of Plato. They were grounded in observation, in the study of the natural world. Aristotle encouraged his students to ask questions, to conduct experiments, to look closely at the world around them. His philosophy was one of curiosity, of seeking knowledge through experience and observation. But even as Aristotle developed his own ideas, he never forgot the lessons he had learned from Plato. The respect he held for his former teacher remained strong, and though their philosophies differed, Aristotle always acknowledged the debt he owed to the academy and to Plato himself. The break from Plato was not a rejection of his teachings, but a necessary step in Aristotle's own journey toward understanding. After several years in Assos, Aristotle moved to the island of Lesbos, where he continued his studies of the natural world. He spent time observing the marine life in the waters around the island, fascinated by the diversity of creatures he found there. These observations would later become an important part of his work in biology, a field in which he would make significant contributions. Eventually, Aristotle's journey would take him back to Greece, where he would establish his own school, the Lyceum in Athens. But that is a story for another time. For now, the young philosopher was still on his path of discovery, still seeking the knowledge that would one day make him one of the greatest thinkers in history. The break from Plato was a turning point in Aristotle's life. It was a moment of both loss and liberation, a step away from the teachings of his youth and toward the creation of his own philosophy. It was a journey that would take him far from the academy, but it was also a journey that would bring him closer to the truth he sought. And though the road was long and sometimes difficult, Aristotle walked it with the determination and curiosity that had always driven him, knowing that each step brought him closer to the answers he was seeking. Chapter 5. The Encounter with King Philip. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the hills of Macedonia. Aristotle, now a man seasoned by years of travel and study, walked along a dusty road deep in thought. His journey had taken him far from the bustling streets of Athens, through the serene landscapes of Greece, and now to this ancient land. The air was thick with the scents of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the crunch of gravel beneath his sandals. As Aristotle walked, a messenger approached him, his face serious and urgent. The man bowed low and handed Aristotle a scroll sealed with a royal insignia. Aristotle took the scroll, feeling the weight of the wax seal between his fingers. He knew that this was no ordinary message. It was a summons from King Philip II of Macedonia, one of the most powerful rulers in the Greek world. Aristotle broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The message was brief but clear. King Philip had heard of Aristotle's wisdom and knowledge, and he desired the philosopher's presence at his court. The king had a special request. He wanted Aristotle to become the tutor of his son, Alexander. Aristotle paused for a moment, considering the significance of the invitation. King Philip was known for his ambition, his military prowess, and his dreams of uniting all of Greece under his rule. To be invited to his court was an honor, but it also carried great responsibility. The boy Aristotle was being asked to teach was no ordinary child. Alexander was destined for greatness. Even at a young age, he was already showing signs of the fierce intelligence and strength that would one day make him one of the most famous conquerors in history. Without hesitation, Aristotle accepted the invitation. He understood that this was a unique opportunity, not just to impart knowledge, but to shape the future of Macedonia and perhaps even the world. The philosopher packed his belongings and set off for Pella, the capital of Macedonia, where King Philip's court was located. When Aristotle arrived at the royal palace, he was greeted with respect and curiosity. The palace was a grand structure, with marble columns and expansive courtyards filled with statues of gods and heroes. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of battle and triumph, reflecting the king's military successes. King Philip himself was a formidable figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence. He welcomed Aristotle warmly, his voice deep and resonant as he spoke of his hopes for his son, Alexander. The king's eyes sparkled with pride as he described the boy's talents, his quick mind, his love of learning, and his fierce determination. But Philip also knew that Alexander needed more than just physical training to become a great leader. He needed the wisdom and guidance that only a philosopher like Aristotle could provide. When Aristotle first met Alexander, he saw a boy of about 13 with a sharp gaze and an air of confidence beyond his years. Alexander was curious and eager to learn, his mind like a sponge ready to absorb all the knowledge Aristotle could offer. But there was also a restlessness about him, a desire for action, for adventure. Aristotle recognized this immediately. Alexander was not just a student, he was a warrior in the making. The lessons began in earnest. Aristotle's teachings were not confined to a classroom. They took place in the gardens of the palace, in the shadows of ancient trees, and by the banks of the rivers that flowed through Macedonia. Aristotle taught Alexander about philosophy, science, and the arts, but he also spoke of ethics, leadership, and the responsibilities that came with power. He wanted to mold Alexander not just into a ruler, but into a philosopher king, a leader who could conquer with both strength and wisdom. Aristotle's influence on Alexander was profound. He introduced the young prince to the works of Homer, particularly the Iliad, which would become one of Alexander's most cherished texts. Aristotle helped Alexander see the world not just as a battlefield, but as a place filled with ideas, cultures, and knowledge. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander learned to appreciate the complexities of human nature, the importance of justice, and the value of wisdom. But Aristotle also understood that Alexander was different from other students. He knew that Alexander's destiny was tied to the sword as much as to the scroll. So Aristotle's teachings were practical as well as philosophical. He taught Alexander about geography, about the lands beyond Greece that he would one day conquer. He explained the nature of different peoples, their customs, and their ways of thinking. Aristotle prepared Alexander for the world he would one day rule, arming him with knowledge as well as strategy. As the years passed, the bond between Aristotle and Alexander grew strong. There was mutual respect and admiration, but also moments of tension. Alexander was headstrong, and there were times when his ambition clashed with Aristotle's more measured approach. But these moments only served to deepen their relationship, as each challenged the other to think more deeply, to see the world from different perspectives. One day, as they walked through the palace gardens, Alexander asked Aristotle a question that had been on his mind. "Teacher," he said, "do you think I am destined to be a great king?" Aristotle looked at the boy, who was now on the brink of manhood, and saw the fire in his eyes. He knew that Alexander's future was already taking shape, that his path was set on a course that would change history. "Greatness," Aristotle replied, "is not just in what you achieve, but in how you achieve it. A true king rules with wisdom, with justice, and with respect for those he leads. You have the potential for greatness, Alexander, but remember that power is a tool. It can be used to build, but it can also destroy. The choice of how to use it will be yours." These words stayed with Alexander, guiding him as he grew into the leader who would one day be known as Alexander the Great. Aristotle's teachings shaped the young prince's mind, helping him to see beyond the immediate, to think about the consequences of his actions, and to strive for a legacy that would endure. The time eventually came for Alexander to take up the mantle of leadership. King Philip's ambitions were realized as he united Greece under his rule, and Alexander stood ready to follow in his father's footsteps. But he would do so not just as a warrior, but as a thinker, a man who had been taught to see the world in all its complexity. When Aristotle and Alexander finally parted ways, there was a sense of completion. Aristotle had done what he had set out to do. He had prepared Alexander for the world that awaited him. But there was also a sadness in the parting, a recognition that their paths would now diverge. Aristotle returned to Athens, where he would continue his work, while Alexander embarked on his journey to conquer the known world. Yet, despite the distance, the lessons Aristotle had taught remained with Alexander. The philosopher's wisdom was a constant companion to the king, guiding him through the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. The encounter with King Philip and the years spent tutoring Alexander were pivotal moments in Aristotle's life. They were years filled with challenge and reward, with the forging of a relationship that would shape the course of history. Aristotle had taken on the role of a teacher, but in doing so he had also become a part of something much larger, a legacy that would endure through the ages. As Aristotle continued his own journey, the seeds he had planted in Alexander's mind began to grow, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of the ancient world. And though Aristotle's direct influence on Alexander would fade as the years passed, the wisdom he imparted would echo through the centuries, a testament to the power of knowledge and the enduring impact of a great teacher. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Aristotle here on Woo English. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and comment. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps us bring you more inspiring content. Chapter 6. The Return to Athens. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city of Athens, casting a soft golden light on the marble temples and bustling streets. Aristotle, now no longer the young student who had once walked these streets, but a mature and respected philosopher, felt a sense of homecoming as he approached the city gates. His travels had taken him far and wide, from the courts of Macedonia, where he had tutored the future conqueror, Alexander, to the peaceful shores of Lesbos, where he had studied the wonders of the natural world. But now, he was returning to the place where his journey as a philosopher had truly begun. Athens had changed in the years since Aristotle had left, but the city's spirit of learning and debate remained as vibrant as ever. The agora buzzed with the voices of merchants and scholars alike. The Acropolis stood proudly atop its hill, and the Grand Academy, founded by his former teacher Plato, continued to be a centre of intellectual life. Yet, as Aristotle walked through the familiar streets, he knew that his return marked the beginning of something new, something that would leave a lasting impact on the city and beyond. Aristotle was welcomed back to Athens with great respect. His reputation had grown immensely during his years away. Scholars and philosophers from across Greece spoke of his teachings, his writings, and his discoveries. He was no longer just Plato's student. He was a thinker in his own right, with ideas that challenged the status quo and offered new ways of understanding the world. One of the first things Aristotle did upon his return was to establish his own school, a place where he could teach and explore ideas freely, a place that would reflect his unique approach to knowledge. He chose a location near the temple of Apollo Lyceos, in a peaceful grove on the outskirts of the city. This school would come to be known as the Lyceum. The Lyceum was different from the academy in many ways. While Plato's academy was focused on the world of ideas and abstract thought, the Lyceum emphasized observation, experience, and the study of the natural world. Aristotle believed that knowledge did not come from contemplation alone, but from actively engaging with the world around us, from asking questions, conducting experiments, and seeking answers through careful study. Aristotle's teaching style reflected this belief. He did not confine his lessons to a classroom. Instead, he and his students would walk together through the gardens and groves surrounding the Lyceum, discussing everything from the stars in the sky to the creatures in the sea. These walks became known as the peripatetic style of teaching, named after the Greek word for walking, peripatein. It was during these strolls that some of the most important ideas in Western philosophy and science were born. The Lyceum quickly became a centre of learning, attracting students from all over Greece. Aristotle's reputation drew many eager young minds, all hoping to learn from the great philosopher. His students were not only interested in philosophy, but in a wide range of subjects, including biology, ethics, politics, and metaphysics. Aristotle's curiosity was boundless, and he encouraged the same in his students. He taught them to observe the world closely, to ask deep questions, and to seek knowledge through careful reasoning and evidence. Aristotle's own work during this time was prolific. He wrote extensively on nearly every subject imaginable, from the nature of life to the principles of logic, from the structure of governments to the movements of the stars. His writings were not just theoretical, they were grounded in observation and experimentation. Aristotle dissected animals to understand their anatomy, he studied the behavior of plants, and he made detailed observations of the weather, the stars, and the physical world around him. One of the most significant contributions Aristotle made during his time at the Lyceum was his work on logic. He developed a system of reasoning known as syllogism, which became the foundation of Western logical thought. A syllogism is a way of drawing a conclusion from two premises. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This method of reasoning was revolutionary, providing a clear and systematic way of thinking that could be applied to all areas of knowledge. Aristotle also made important contributions to the study of ethics. He believed that the goal of life was to achieve eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or flourishing. But for Aristotle, eudaimonia was not just about feeling good. It was about living a life of virtue, fulfilling one's potential, and contributing to the well-being of others. He taught that virtue was a balance between extremes, a concept he called the golden mean. For example, courage is the mean between recklessness and cowardice, and generosity is the mean between wastefulness and stinginess. Aristotle's ideas on ethics would go on to influence countless generations of thinkers. The Lyceum became more than just a school. It became a community of scholars, a place where ideas were exchanged freely, where new knowledge was created and shared. Aristotle's influence extended beyond his immediate students. His ideas began to spread throughout Athens and across Greece, influencing not only philosophy, but also the fields of science, politics, and education. But Aristotle's time in Athens was not without challenges. The political climate in the city was tense, and his association with Alexander, now known as Alexander the Great, brought suspicion. Some Athenians viewed Aristotle as a threat, a man whose ideas could challenge the status quo. There were whispers of treachery, of political intrigue, but Aristotle remained focused on his work. He believed in the power of knowledge, in the importance of seeking truth, and he continued to teach and write despite the growing tensions around him. As the years passed, Aristotle's health began to decline. He had devoted his life to the pursuit of knowledge, to teaching and writing, and the toll of these efforts was beginning to show. But even as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp, his curiosity undiminished. He continued to teach at the Lyceum, to walk with his students through the gardens, discussing the mysteries of the universe. In the end, Aristotle's return to Athens marked the beginning of a new era of learning and discovery. The Lyceum became a beacon of knowledge, a place where the seeds of many of the ideas that would shape Western thought were planted. Aristotle's legacy was not just in the books he wrote or the students he taught, but in the way he approached the world, with curiosity, with a deep respect for knowledge, and with a belief that understanding the world around us was the key to a good and meaningful life. As Aristotle neared the end of his life, he knew that his work at the Lyceum would continue to influence generations to come. His students would go on to become teachers themselves, spreading the ideas they had learned from him. The Lyceum, the school he had founded, would stand as a testament to the power of learning, a place where future philosophers and scientists could continue the quest for knowledge that had been Aristotle's lifelong passion. And so, Aristotle's return to Athens was not just a homecoming. It was the beginning of a legacy that would endure through the ages. A legacy built on the belief that the pursuit of knowledge is one of the highest callings of humanity. Chapter 7. The Philosopher and the Scientist. In the quiet early morning, when the first light of dawn touched the sky, Aristotle often found himself wandering through the groves of the Lyceum. His mind, always in motion, pondered the mysteries of the world. He was not just a philosopher, lost in thought. He was also a scientist, with a keen eye for detail and an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. Aristotle's interest in science was not separate from his philosophy. To him, understanding the world meant understanding life itself, how things worked, why they existed, and what purpose they served. He believed that everything in nature had a purpose, a reason for being. This belief guided much of his scientific work and became a cornerstone of his teachings. Every day, Aristotle would observe the world around him. He watched birds in flight, studied the way plants grew, and examined the stars as they twinkled in the night sky. His curiosity knew no bounds. He wanted to understand not just how things appeared, but why they existed in the way they did. To Aristotle, knowledge was not just about ideas. It was about uncovering the secrets of the universe. One of Aristotle's greatest contributions to science was his study of biology. He spent countless hours observing animals, both in their natural habitats and in more controlled environments. He dissected them, carefully noting the structure of their bodies, the way their organs worked, and how they interacted with their environment. His observations were detailed and meticulous, and they formed the basis of his theories about life. Aristotle classified animals into different groups based on their similarities and differences. This was a revolutionary idea at the time, and it laid the groundwork for the field of taxonomy, the science of classifying living things. He identified patterns in the animal kingdom, noting how certain traits were shared by different species, and he sought to understand the reasons behind these patterns. But Aristotle's studies were not limited to animals. He was equally fascinated by plants. He studied how they grew, how they reproduced, and how they interacted with their surroundings. He wrote about the different types of plants, from trees to herbs, and he tried to understand the role they played in the broader ecosystem. To Aristotle, plants were just as important as animals in the grand scheme of life. Aristotle's interest in the natural world also extended to the human body. He was deeply curious about how the body worked, how the different parts functioned together to create life. He studied anatomy, dissecting human and animal bodies to learn about the structure of muscles, bones, and organs. He wanted to know how the heart pumped blood, how the lungs breathed air, and how the brain controlled the body's actions. In his studies of the human body, Aristotle made many observations that were ahead of his time. He described the differences between veins and arteries. He noted the importance of the brain in controlling the body. And he wrote about the stages of human development from conception to old age. Although some of his ideas were later proven incorrect, his work laid the foundation for future scientists to build upon. Aristotle did not just observe the world, he sought to explain it. He developed theories to make sense of the patterns he saw in nature. For example, he believed that all living things were driven by a soul or essence that gave them life. This essence, he thought, was what made a plant grow, an animal move, or a human think. According to Aristotle, everything in the natural world was moving towards its own fulfillment, its own purpose. His work in physics was also groundbreaking. Aristotle studied the movement of objects, the nature of space and time, and the concept of change. He developed ideas about how the world worked, based on his observations and reasoning. For instance, he believed that objects fell to the ground because they were seeking their natural place in the universe. Although we now understand gravity differently, Aristotle's ideas were an important step in the development of science. Aristotle's curiosity led him to write many books, each filled with his observations and theories. These works covered a wide range of subjects, from biology and physics to ethics, politics, and metaphysics. In his book Physics, Aristotle explored the nature of change and motion, asking questions that would inspire scientists for centuries. In On the Heavens, he wrote about the stars, the planets, and the structure of the universe, offering ideas that would influence astronomy long after his time. One of Aristotle's most important ideas was the concept of the four causes. He believed that to truly understand something, you needed to know four things about it: its material cause, what it is made of; its formal cause, its shape or form; its efficient cause, how it came to be; and its final cause, its purpose or goal. This way of thinking helped Aristotle make sense of the natural world and provided a framework for scientific inquiry. But despite all he had accomplished, Aristotle was never satisfied. He always wanted to learn more, to dig deeper, to discover the secrets that still eluded him. His curiosity drove him to continue his studies, even when others might have felt they had learned enough. To Aristotle, the pursuit of knowledge was a lifelong journey, one that never truly ended. His work was not without its challenges. Aristotle lived in a time when much of the world was still shrouded in mystery, when many of the tools we take for granted today, microscopes, telescopes, even the scientific method, did not yet exist. But Aristotle's approach to learning, his belief in observation and reasoning, set the stage for the scientific advances that would come in the centuries after his death. Aristotle's influence extended far beyond his own lifetime. His writings were studied and debated by scholars across the ancient world, and they continued to shape scientific and philosophical thought throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. His ideas about the natural world, about logic and reasoning, and about the purpose of life became central to the Western intellectual tradition. Yet, for all his achievements, Aristotle remained humble in his pursuit of knowledge. He understood that the world was vast, that there was always more to learn, more to discover. He saw himself as a small part of a much larger quest, a quest that would continue long after he was gone. In the end, Aristotle was both a philosopher and a scientist, a man who sought to understand the world in all its complexity. His work laid the foundations for many fields of study, from biology to physics, from ethics to politics. But more than that, Aristotle's life was a testament to the power of curiosity, the importance of asking questions, and the belief that knowledge is the key to understanding the world around us. As Aristotle walked through the gardens of the Lyceum, his mind filled with thoughts of the natural world, he knew that his journey was far from over. There were still so many questions left to answer, so many mysteries left to explore. And so, with each new day, he continued to seek knowledge, driven by the same curiosity that had guided him all his life. Chapter 8. The Politics of Athens. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the marble temples of Athens, Aristotle walked through the bustling streets, his mind occupied with thoughts far beyond the everyday concerns of the city's people. While his passion for science and philosophy had shaped much of his life, Aristotle knew that understanding the natural world was only part of the equation. To truly grasp the essence of human existence, he needed to delve into the complexities of society and politics. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was a city filled with debates, discussions, and often fierce rivalries. It was a place where ideas about governance, ethics, and justice were not just theoretical concepts, but matters of life and death. Aristotle was deeply aware of this, and he felt a strong pull to contribute his own ideas to the ongoing conversations about how society should be organized. Aristotle believed that just as there were natural laws that governed the physical world, there were also principles that guided human behavior and the functioning of societies. To him, understanding politics was as essential as understanding the stars or the human body. Politics, after all, was about people, how they lived together, how they made decisions, and how they pursued the common good. In his writings on politics, Aristotle sought to answer some of the most fundamental questions of his time. What is the best form of government? How should rulers govern? What makes a good citizen? These were not just abstract questions for Aristotle. They were vital issues that affected the lives of everyone in Athens and beyond. Aristotle's approach to politics was rooted in observation and analysis, much like his work in science. He studied different forms of government, monarchies, aristocracies, and democracies, looking at their strengths and weaknesses. He didn't just rely on theory, he examined real-world examples, drawing from the history of various city-states to understand what made some successful and others fail. One of Aristotle's key beliefs was that the best government was one that promoted the well-being of its citizens. He argued that a government should aim for the good life for all, balancing the needs of the many with the rights of the few. To Aristotle, this meant creating a system where citizens could participate in decision-making, where justice was upheld, and where leaders acted with virtue and wisdom. Aristotle introduced the concept of the golden mean in politics, just as he had in ethics. He believed that the best form of government was one that avoided extremes. A monarchy could be good if the ruler was just, but it could easily turn into tyranny if the ruler became corrupt. Similarly, a democracy could allow for broad participation, but it could also descend into mob rule if not kept in check. Aristotle favoured a mixed government, one that combined elements of democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy to ensure stability and fairness. But Aristotle's involvement in politics was not just academic. Living in Athens, he found himself in the midst of the city's intense political struggles. Athens was a city full of factions, each vying for power and influence. The democratic ideals that Athens was famous for were often at odds with the reality of political life, where ambition, greed, and rivalry could lead to conflict and corruption. Aristotle, despite his focus on ethics and the common good, was not immune to these challenges. He had to navigate the complex and often treacherous political landscape of Athens, where alliances could shift overnight, and where even the most respected philosophers could find themselves embroiled in controversy. One of the most significant challenges Aristotle faced was his association with Macedonia, particularly his former student, Alexander the Great. While Aristotle had been proud to tutor Alexander, his connection to the Macedonian court made him a target of suspicion in Athens. Many Athenians viewed Macedonia as a threat to their independence, and anyone linked to the Macedonian kings could be seen as an enemy of Athenian democracy. Aristotle's position became even more precarious after Alexander began his campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. As Alexander's power grew, so did the fears of those in Athens who worried about losing their autonomy. Aristotle, despite his efforts to remain focused on his work, found himself caught in the middle of these political tensions. The philosopher had always believed in staying true to his principles, even when it was difficult. He continued to write and teach about the importance of justice, virtue, and the common good, even as the political atmosphere in Athens grew increasingly hostile. Aristotle knew that his ideas were controversial, that they challenged the status quo, but he also knew that they were necessary. Aristotle's involvement in politics was not just about theory, it was about making a difference in the real world. He believed that philosophers had a responsibility to engage with society, to use their knowledge and wisdom to guide leaders and citizens alike. For Aristotle, politics was not a distant or abstract subject. It was the very fabric of life in Athens, woven into every decision, every debate, every conflict. Despite the challenges, Aristotle remained committed to his vision of a just society. He continued to teach at the Lyceum, where his students were encouraged to think critically about the political issues of their time. He challenged them to question not just how governments worked, but how they should work. He urged them to consider the ethical implications of their actions, to strive for the common good, and to avoid the pitfalls of power and corruption. Aristotle's ideas on politics were revolutionary, and they continue to influence thinkers to this day. His belief in the importance of the middle ground, of balancing the needs of the many with the rights of the few, laid the groundwork for much of modern political thought. His emphasis on the role of virtue in leadership, on the need for justice and fairness, resonates in discussions about government and society across the world. Yet, Aristotle's political life was not without personal cost. The political tensions in Athens eventually forced him to leave the city he had come to call home. Accused of impiety, likely due to his connections with Macedonia and his controversial ideas, Aristotle saw the writing on the wall. He chose to leave Athens rather than face the same fate as Socrates, who had been executed for his beliefs years earlier. In his final days, Aristotle retreated to the island of Euboea, where he continued to write and reflect on his life's work. He knew that his time was short, but he remained focused on his ideas, on the legacy he would leave behind. He had spent his life seeking knowledge, understanding the natural world, and exploring the complexities of human society. He had faced challenges, both intellectual and political, but he had never wavered in his commitment to the pursuit of truth. Aristotle's involvement in the politics of Athens was a testament to his belief that philosophy was not just about thinking, it was about living. It was about engaging with the world, about making a difference, about striving for a society that was just, fair, and virtuous. His life was a journey of discovery, not just of the natural world, but of the human soul, of what it meant to live a good life in a complex and often challenging world. As Aristotle looked back on his life, he knew that he had made his mark on the world, not just as a philosopher, but as a scientist, a teacher, and a citizen of Athens. His ideas would continue to shape the world long after he was gone, influencing generations of thinkers, leaders, and ordinary people striving to understand the world and their place in it. Chapter 9. The Loss of Alexander. The sun was setting over Athens, casting long, melancholic shadows across the city. Aristotle sat in the garden of the Lyceum, his thoughts heavy and his heart burdened with a sorrow he had not felt in years. A messenger had arrived earlier that day, bringing with him news that would shake the very foundations of Aristotle's world. Alexander the Great, the brilliant, ambitious young king whom Aristotle had once tutored, was dead. The news hit Aristotle like a physical blow. For a moment he could hardly breathe. The boy he had watched grow into a man, the student who had become a conqueror, was gone. Alexander, who had once been full of life and dreams of empire, had fallen at the age of 32, far from the land of his birth. As Aristotle sat in the fading light, he felt as though he had lost a part of himself, a part that had been intricately woven into the fabric of his life. Memories of Alexander flooded Aristotle's mind. He remembered the first time he had met the young prince in Macedonia, a boy with fierce eyes and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. Aristotle had seen potential in him, not just to be a great ruler, but to be a man of wisdom and virtue. He had taken Alexander under his wing, teaching him about philosophy, ethics, and the natural world. Together, they had explored the mysteries of life, walking through the gardens, discussing the works of Homer, and contemplating the stars. Aristotle had known that Alexander was destined for greatness, but he had also hoped that his teachings would guide the young man to be a ruler who led with wisdom as well as strength. Now, with Alexander gone, Aristotle wondered if he had done enough, if his teachings had truly shaped the king's legacy. But Alexander's death was more than just a personal loss for Aristotle. It sent shockwaves through Greece, and especially through Athens, a city that had always been wary of Macedonian power. Alexander's empire had stretched across 3 continents, and with his death, the stability of that empire was suddenly in question. Greece was on the brink of political turmoil, and old rivalries and fears began to resurface. For Aristotle, this meant danger. He had always been associated with Macedonia, not only because of his role as Alexander's tutor, but also because of his own connections to the Macedonian court. In the eyes of many Athenians, Aristotle was now a symbol of the foreign power that had dominated Greece for so long. Suspicion and distrust began to grow, and Aristotle, once a respected figure in the city, found himself increasingly isolated. whispers of conspiracy spread through Athens. People began to murmur that Aristotle had played a role in Alexander's rise to power, that he had been too close to the Macedonian rulers, and that he could not be trusted. These were dangerous times, and Aristotle, a man of reason and thought, found himself entangled in the irrational fears and suspicions of the city. The political climate in Athens grew more volatile with each passing day. The city, which had once welcomed Aristotle back with open arms, now seemed to turn against him. His association with Macedonia made him a target, and the very ideas that had once made him a respected philosopher were now used against him. The people of Athens, driven by fear and uncertainty, began to see Aristotle as a threat, someone who was too closely tied to the forces that had oppressed them. Aristotle, despite his love for Athens, knew that he could no longer stay in the city. The risk was too great. He had seen what could happen to those who fell out of favour in the tumultuous world of Athenian politics. His own teacher, Socrates, had been sentenced to death for his beliefs. Aristotle had no intention of meeting the same fate. The decision to leave Athens was not an easy one. The city had been his home for so many years, the place where he had studied, taught, and shared his knowledge with eager students. The Lyceum had become a centre of learning, a place where ideas were born and nurtured. But now, that chapter of his life was coming to an end. Aristotle made his preparations quietly, knowing that his departure would be seen as an admission of guilt by some, but understanding that it was his only choice. He decided to retreat to Chalcis, a town on the island of Euboea, where he could live out his remaining days in relative peace. It was a bitter decision, leaving behind the city he had once called home, but it was a necessary one. As he packed his belongings, Aristotle felt a deep sadness. He had dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge, to understanding the world and sharing that understanding with others. But now, in his old age, he was being forced to leave the place where so much of that work had been done. The Lyceum, the school he had founded with such hope and passion, would continue without him. But Aristotle knew that it would never be the same. On the day he left Athens, the city was quiet. The once familiar streets seemed strange and distant, as if they no longer belonged to him. Aristotle walked through the gates of the city, leaving behind the Acropolis, the Agora, and all the places that had been a part of his life for so long. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just for Alexander, but for the life he had built in Athens. Arriving in Chalcis, Aristotle found a measure of peace. The town was far removed from the political intrigues of Athens, and there he could reflect on his life's work. But the weight of Alexander's death and the betrayal of Athens still hung over him. He continued to write, to think, and to teach, but he knew that his time was drawing to a close. In Chalcis, Aristotle's health began to decline. The years of travel, study, and teaching had taken their toll, and the recent events had only added to the strain. He was surrounded by a few loyal students and family members, but the vibrant intellectual community of Athens was far behind him now. As he lay on his deathbed, Aristotle's thoughts turned to the legacy he would leave behind. He had devoted his life to the pursuit of knowledge, to understanding the world and helping others to do the same. He had written countless works, explored the depths of philosophy, science, and politics, and taught some of the greatest minds of his time. But he also knew that his ideas would be questioned, challenged, and reinterpreted by future generations. In his final moments, Aristotle found comfort in the thought that his work would live on, even if he could not. His teachings would continue to inspire, to provoke thought, and to guide those who sought to understand the world around them. And though he had lost so much, his student, his home, his health, he had not lost his passion for knowledge, nor his belief in the power of reason. Aristotle passed away quietly in Chalcis, far from the city that had once been the centre of his life. But his legacy endured, carried forward by those who had learned from him, those who would continue to explore the ideas he had devoted his life to. The loss of Alexander had been a deep wound, but it was through that loss that Aristotle's final chapter was written, a chapter of resilience, reflection, and a lasting contribution to the world of ideas. Chapter 10. The Final Years. Aristotle's departure from Athens was a quiet one. The once lively city, full of debate and ideas, had grown cold to him. As he walked away from the city's gates, the weight of the years and the sorrows he had faced pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had left Athens before, as a young man eager to learn and explore. But this time, it was different. This time, he knew he might never return. Aristotle settled in the small town of Chalcis on the island of Euboea. It was a peaceful place, far from the political turmoil that had plagued his later years in Athens. The town was surrounded by green hills and the gentle waves of the sea, a stark contrast to the noise and energy of the city he had left behind. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, Aristotle hoped to find some measure of peace in his final years. Even as his body grew weaker, Aristotle's mind remained sharp and full of curiosity. He continued to write and teach, determined to pass on as much of his knowledge as possible. Each morning, he would rise early and walk through the gardens near his home, the cool breeze from the sea refreshing his spirits. He would pause often, looking out at the horizon, his thoughts drifting to the many questions that still remained unanswered. In Chalcis, Aristotle was joined by a small group of loyal students and family members who had followed him from Athens. These were the people who had stood by him through the highs and lows of his life, and now they were his constant companions as he approached the end of his journey. Together, they would gather in the afternoons, sitting under the shade of the trees, as Aristotle shared his thoughts and ideas, much as he had done in the Lyceum years before. Aristotle's writings during these final years were a reflection of a lifetime of thought and observation. He delved deeper into subjects that had always fascinated him: ethics, metaphysics, politics, and science. His works were filled with the wisdom of a man who had spent his life seeking knowledge, and they would go on to influence countless generations after him. But there was also a sense of urgency in Aristotle's work during this time. He knew that his days were numbered, and he wanted to ensure that his ideas would not be lost. He wrote with a clarity and precision that showed his commitment to leaving behind a legacy that could stand the test of time. Every sentence, every argument was crafted with care, as if Aristotle was pouring the last of his strength into his words. Despite the challenges he had faced, the loss of Alexander, the political turmoil, and the exile from Athens, Aristotle remained steadfast in his belief in the power of knowledge. He believed that understanding the world was the key to living a good life, and that this understanding could only be achieved through reason, observation, and thought. Even as he approached the end of his life, this belief never wavered. Aristotle's health continued to decline, and he knew that the end was near. But he faced it with the same calm and rationality that had guided him throughout his life. He made preparations for his passing, ensuring that his writings and teachings would be preserved and shared with future generations. He knew that his time on earth was coming to an end, but he took comfort in the knowledge that his work would live on. As the days grew shorter and the air cooler, Aristotle spent more time indoors, surrounded by his books and papers. He would sit by the window, looking out at the changing landscape, the leaves turning gold and red with the coming of autumn. His thoughts would often drift back to his early days in Stagira, to the years spent in Athens, and to the time he had shared with his beloved student, Alexander. There was sadness in these memories, but also a deep sense of fulfillment. Aristotle knew that he had lived a full life, one dedicated to the pursuit of truth and understanding. He had faced challenges and hardships, but he had also experienced the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of teaching, and the companionship of those who shared his passion for knowledge. In his final days, Aristotle was surrounded by those who cared for him. His students, who had learned so much from him, stayed close, ready to offer comfort and support. They knew that they were witnessing the passing of a great mind, a man whose ideas had shaped their understanding of the world. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, casting a warm glow over the room, Aristotle quietly passed away. His death was peaceful, a gentle end to a life that had been anything but. He left the world as he had lived in it, with dignity, with grace, and with a mind full of questions that would continue to inspire others long after he was gone. Aristotle's passing marked the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of a legacy that would endure for centuries. His writings, his teachings, and his discoveries became the foundation for much of Western philosophy and science. His ideas about ethics, politics, logic, and the natural world would influence thinkers from the Roman Empire to the Renaissance and beyond. But more than just his ideas, it was Aristotle's approach to knowledge that left the deepest mark. He taught that the pursuit of understanding was a noble and worthwhile endeavour, one that required patience, curiosity, and a willingness to question everything. He believed that knowledge was not just a collection of facts, but a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world with an open mind and a critical eye. In the years after his death, Aristotle's students carried on his work, spreading his teachings throughout Greece and beyond. The Lyceum continued to thrive, becoming a centre of learning that attracted scholars from all over the ancient world. Aristotle's influence could be seen in the works of philosophers, scientists, and leaders who followed in his footsteps, each building on the foundation he had laid. Aristotle had lived a life dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, and in doing so, he had left behind a legacy that would continue to inspire and guide humanity for generations to come. His final years in Chalcis were a testament to his unwavering commitment to his work, even in the face of adversity. And though he is no longer with us, his ideas live on, a lasting reminder of the power of the human mind and the endless possibilities that come from asking the right questions. As the sun set on that final chapter of Aristotle's life, it also rose on a new day, one where his teachings would continue to illuminate the path for those who seek to understand the world and their place in it. Aristotle's story, his journey from a small town in Greece to becoming one of the greatest minds in history, remains a source of inspiration, a beacon of knowledge that shines brightly even after all these centuries. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Aristotle. The passing of Aristotle marked the end of an extraordinary life, but it was far from the end of his influence. In the quiet town of Chalcis, where Aristotle had spent his final days, the seeds of his teachings were already beginning to take root. His students, loyal and dedicated, knew that they carried something precious, a legacy of knowledge that needed to be preserved, shared, and expanded. The Lyceum, the school Aristotle had founded in Athens, continued to thrive even after his death. The students who had walked with Aristotle through its gardens, discussing philosophy, ethics, and science, were now the torchbearers of his ideas. They took up the mantle of leadership, ensuring that the Lyceum remained a place of learning, a place where Aristotle's methods and ideas could be explored further. Aristotle had left behind a vast body of work, covering nearly every subject imaginable. His writings were not just collections of facts or observations, they were profound explorations of the world and humanity's place within it. These works became the foundation of Western thought, influencing everything from science to politics, from ethics to metaphysics. Aristotle's books were copied, studied, and debated by scholars across the ancient world. In the years following Aristotle's death, his influence began to spread far beyond the walls of the Lyceum. His students, many of whom were brilliant thinkers in their own right, travelled throughout Greece and the wider Mediterranean, bringing Aristotle's teachings with them. They established schools of their own, where they taught the ideas they had learned from their master. These schools became centres of learning, where the torch of knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Aristotle's impact on the ancient world was profound. His work laid the groundwork for the development of science, particularly in the fields of biology, physics, and astronomy. His method of observation, classification, and logical reasoning became the standard for scientific inquiry, influencing scholars for centuries to come. In ethics, his concept of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies in moderation, became a guiding principle for those seeking to live a good and balanced life. But Aristotle's influence was not limited to the realm of science and ethics. His ideas about politics and governance also had a lasting impact. Aristotle believed that the best government was one that promoted the well-being of all its citizens, balancing the needs of the many with the rights of the few. These ideas resonated deeply in the ancient world and continued to shape political thought long after his time. As the centuries passed, Aristotle's legacy grew even stronger. During the Roman Empire, his works were studied by scholars who recognized the depth and breadth of his knowledge. The Romans, known for their practical approach to life, found much to admire in Aristotle's methodical and logical way of thinking. His writings on rhetoric, in particular, became essential reading for anyone involved in law, politics, or public speaking. Aristotle's ideas also found a new home in the Islamic world. Muslim scholars, fascinated by the works of the ancient Greeks, translated Aristotle's books into Arabic and studied them with great care. These scholars, known for their own contributions to science and philosophy, revered Aristotle as one of the greatest thinkers of all time. They built upon his ideas, expanding and refining them, and in doing so, helped to preserve and transmit Aristotle's legacy to the wider world. The influence of Aristotle reached its zenith during the Middle Ages in Europe. As the intellectual climate of Europe began to revive, scholars turned once again to the works of the ancient Greeks, seeking wisdom and guidance. Aristotle's ideas, which had been carefully preserved and studied by Muslim scholars, were reintroduced to Europe through translations into Latin. This rediscovery of Aristotle had a profound impact on the development of medieval philosophy and science. In the universities of medieval Europe, Aristotle's works became central to the curriculum. Scholars such as Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle's ideas as the foundation for their own philosophical systems, blending them with Christian theology to create a new synthesis of faith and reason. Aristotle's logic, in particular, became the cornerstone of medieval education, shaping the way scholars approached problems and sought solutions. But Aristotle's legacy was not just about the content of his ideas. It was also about his approach to knowledge. Aristotle believed that understanding the world required careful observation, critical thinking, and a willingness to question assumptions. This approach became the bedrock of the scientific method, which would eventually lead to the great scientific discoveries of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Even today, more than 2,000 years after his death, Aristotle's influence can be seen in nearly every field of human knowledge. His ideas continue to shape our understanding of the world, from the sciences to the humanities, from ethics to politics. In education, Aristotle's emphasis on logical reasoning and critical thinking remains a cornerstone of teaching and learning. Aristotle's legacy is a testament to the power of knowledge and the human spirit's unending quest for understanding. His life was dedicated to the pursuit of truth, and his works reflect a deep and abiding curiosity about the world. Aristotle believed that knowledge was not just a collection of facts, but a way of seeing the world, of making sense of the complexities of life. For Aristotle, the pursuit of knowledge was a lifelong journey, one that required patience, dedication, and an open mind. He understood that the world was vast and full of mysteries, but he also believed that through careful observation and logical reasoning, these mysteries could be unraveled. His approach to knowledge was not about finding easy answers, but about asking the right questions and seeking out the truth, no matter how difficult or complex it might be. As we look back on Aristotle's life and legacy, we see a man who was not content to accept the world as it was. He sought to understand it, to explain it, and to share that understanding with others. His works have inspired countless generations of thinkers, scientists, and leaders, each building on the foundation he laid. Aristotle's story is one of perseverance, curiosity, and the power of ideas. His legacy reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble and worthwhile endeavor, one that can change the world in profound and lasting ways. Through his life and his work, Aristotle has left us with a gift, a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world that continues to inspire and guide us as we seek to understand the mysteries of life and the universe. In the end, Aristotle's legacy is not just about the ideas he left behind, but about the spirit of inquiry that he embodied. It is a legacy that encourages us to ask questions, to seek answers, and to never stop learning. And in that spirit, Aristotle's influence will continue to resonate, guiding us as we navigate the complexities of the world and the challenges of the future. Chapter 12. The Timeless Philosopher. Imagine the world over 2,000 years ago, a world where the stars were mysteries, where the earth's secrets were hidden in the soil, and where the meaning of life was debated by the greatest minds of the time. It was in this ancient world that Aristotle lived, a man whose thoughts and questions would shape the future in ways even he could not have imagined. Aristotle's story is not just about the past. It is a story that still resonates with us today. It is the story of a mind that dared to question, to explore, and to discover. Aristotle was a man who looked at the world with eyes wide open, always curious, always seeking to understand. His life teaches us that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey without end, a journey that can lead to greatness not just in terms of fame, but in the depth of understanding and wisdom. Throughout his life, Aristotle was never satisfied with easy answers. He believed that every question deserved careful thought, that every idea should be examined from all sides. This was the essence of his philosophy, a belief in the power of reason, observation, and inquiry. Aristotle taught that true knowledge comes from looking at the world as it is, from observing nature, and from asking questions that dig deep into the heart of reality. As we look back on Aristotle's life, we see a man who was not afraid to challenge the accepted ideas of his time. He questioned the teachings of his own mentor, Plato, and developed his own way of thinking. Aristotle was interested in the physical world, in understanding how things worked and why they existed. He wanted to know the reasons behind everything, from the movement of the stars to the behavior of animals, from the workings of governments to the nature of human happiness. Aristotle's ideas were revolutionary, and they continue to inspire us even today. His work laid the foundations for many fields of study: biology, ethics, politics, metaphysics, and more. He introduced the idea that everything in the world has a purpose, a reason for being, and that understanding this purpose is key to understanding life itself. His concept of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies in balance and moderation, still influences how we think about ethics and morality. But what makes Aristotle truly timeless is not just his ideas, but the way he approached life. Aristotle believed that knowledge was not something to be hoarded, but something to be shared. He founded the Lyceum, a school where students could learn, discuss, and explore ideas together. He encouraged his students to think for themselves, to question what they were taught, and to seek out the truth in everything they studied. Aristotle's influence did not end with his death. His students carried his teachings forward, spreading his ideas throughout the ancient world and beyond. His works were studied by scholars in the Roman Empire, translated into Arabic by Muslim scholars, and later reintroduced to Europe, where they became a cornerstone of medieval thought. Aristotle's ideas helped to shape the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, periods of history marked by a renewed interest in science, philosophy, and the pursuit of knowledge. Even today, Aristotle's legacy lives on. His writings are still studied in universities around the world, and his ideas continue to influence modern science, philosophy, and ethics. When we study biology, we see the influence of Aristotle's classification of living things. When we discuss ethics, we often refer back to Aristotle's ideas about virtue and the good life. And when we think about politics, Aristotle's belief in the importance of balance and justice still resonates. But perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from Aristotle is the value of the search for truth. Aristotle's life was a journey of discovery, of learning, and of questioning. He showed us that the world is full of wonders waiting to be understood, and that the search for knowledge is a noble and eternal endeavour. Aristotle believed that by understanding the world, we can live better lives, make better decisions, and contribute to the greater good of society. Aristotle's story is not just about a man who lived long ago. It is a story that each of us can relate to. We all have questions about the world, about life, about our place in the universe. Aristotle reminds us that these questions are worth asking, and that the answers we find can lead to greater understanding and wisdom. He encourages us to look at the world with curiosity, to never stop learning, and to always seek the truth. In many ways, Aristotle is still with us, a timeless philosopher guiding us on our own journeys of discovery. His ideas challenge us to think deeply, to question what we know, and to explore the unknown. His life teaches us that the pursuit of knowledge is not just about finding answers, but about asking the right questions. It is about being open to new ideas, about being willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence, and about understanding that knowledge is a lifelong journey. As we continue our own journeys, we can look to Aristotle as a source of inspiration. His story is a reminder that the search for truth is a journey that never ends, that each of us has the potential to make discoveries that can change the world. Whether we are scientists, philosophers, students, or simply curious minds, Aristotle's legacy invites us to keep asking, to keep exploring, and to never stop seeking the answers that lie just beyond the horizon. In the end, Aristotle's story is not just about the past, it is about the future. It is about the timeless quest for knowledge, a quest that each of us can undertake in our own lives. Aristotle's ideas continue to light the way, showing us that the pursuit of understanding is one of the most important and rewarding journeys we can ever embark on. And in that sense, Aristotle, the timeless philosopher, will always be with us, guiding us as we seek to understand the world and our place within it.